Hello and welcome to what will be an extensive journey into the psyche of one of TV's most complex characters, Dexter Morgan from the series Dexter. Today, we're not just scratching the surface but delving into the depths of his mind. We'll analyse the foundational trauma that birthed his dark passenger, the nuances of his sociopathy, the moral and ethical dilemmas he faces, and the profound identity crisis he experiences. After all, he isn't the most normal human being. And if you are new to the channel, hopefully by the end of this video you will become a subscriber. So let's dive right into it. Dexter's life narrative is deeply rooted in an event so traumatic it practically defines him: the murder of his mother, Laura Moser. This isn't just any traumatic event, it's the cornerstone of Dexter's psychological development. At the age of 3, Dexter was subjected to not only the sight of violence but the intensity of it, surrounded by blood and death for 2 full days before being discovered after witnessing his mother get massacred by a chainsaw. Pretty crazy stuff. This prolonged exposure to such horror could lead to something called traumatic bonding with death itself, potentially desensitizing him to violence or, conversely, making him hyper-aware of it in a way that normalizes it.
Open your eyes and look at what you did!
Traumatic bonding, also known as trauma bonding, is a psychological response to abuse where individuals form strong emotional attachments with their abusers. This phenomenon can occur in various abusive relationships, including those involving domestic violence, child abuse, cult membership, or even in situations like hostage taking. In Dexter's case, it's being sat in a pool of blood for 2 days after witnessing his mother's death, probably one of the worst traumas you could experience. The dark passenger. The dark passenger Dexter refers to can be seen as a psychological construct born from his trauma. In psychological literature, trauma victims sometimes personify their pain or the traumatic event as an entity within them. For Dexter, this entity is his dark passenger, an internal force that compels him towards violence. This could be his mind's way of externalizing the horror he experienced, giving it a form he can interact with, control, or appease. One interpretation is that Dexter's killing is a ritualistic attempt to control or reenact the trauma he suffered. By recreating the scenario where he was powerless, but this time with him in control, he might be subconsciously trying to master the trauma. Each kill becomes a performance, where he dictates the terms, unlike the chaotic, uncontrolled violence of his childhood. The dark passenger also acts as a coping mechanism. By channeling his traumatic response into a structured activity, killing those who deserve it, Dexter creates a narrative where his trauma has a purpose. This gives him a form of identity and control over his life, which was otherwise shattered by that early event. The trauma might have displaced his natural emotional responses with a fascination for blood and death. This displacement can explain why he becomes a blood spatter analyst, where he can interact with death in a controlled, scientific manner, further exploring or perhaps understanding his trauma. As we see in the show, he gets rather excited at the sight of blood. There's also the aspect of rebirth. After the trauma, Dexter's life as a normal child was over. He was reborn into someone who had to navigate the world with this dark passenger. This rebirth is symbolized by his rituals, especially the kill room, which becomes a place of both death and rebirth for his victims, and metaphorically for Dexter each time he indulges his dark passenger while adhering to Harry's code. The trauma could have unlocked any latent aggressive tendencies, perhaps genetically inherited from his lineage. The dark passenger might then be seen as the unleashing of these tendencies, now directed by the trauma's influence. In the show, we see on numerous occasions times where Dexter simply cannot control his dark passenger and just lashes out.
I never meant to hurt her.
Dexter's genetic lineage plays a significant role in his psychological makeup. His brother, Brian Mercer, also known as the Ice Truck Killer, shared the same traumatic experience but without the guiding hand of Harry's code. The familial link suggests a genetic component to their violent tendencies, possibly an inherited predisposition towards antisocial behaviour or psychopathy. Research indicates that genetics can influence traits like aggression, impulsivity, and emotional response. Dexter might have inherited genes that affect the regulation of serotonin, which has been linked to aggressive behaviour. Serotonin is a naturally occurring monoamine neurotransmitter that carries signals between nerve cells throughout your body. It plays an important role in various brain and body functions, including mood stabilization, cognition, learning, memory, and sleep, and is also known as a hormone. This biological foundation could make him more susceptible to the effects of trauma, amplifying his response to it. There's also the possibility of neurological differences. Some studies suggest that individuals with antisocial personality traits might have variations in brain structure or function, particularly in areas related to empathy, impulse control, and moral reasoning. For Dexter, these biological traits might have been exacerbated by the trauma, creating a perfect storm for the emergence of his dark passenger. While trauma certainly shaped Dexter, his sociopathy might have roots in his genetics, Sociopathy, or antisocial personality disorder, has a known genetic component where a family history of similar behaviours increases the likelihood of manifestation in offspring. Dexter's sociopathic traits, like his lack of guilt, his superficial charm when needed, and his strategic manipulation of emotions, could be partially inherited, providing the raw material that trauma then moulded. Despite this genetic influence, Dexter's case also highlights resilience. Not everyone with a genetic predisposition towards sociopathy will become a killer, especially not one with such a structured approach as Dexter. His ability to create and somewhat adhere to Harry's code shows an aspect of his nature that might be described as adaptive, where he harnesses his genetic tendencies for a specific purpose, guided by the trauma's aftermath. I think he was always good, and he even states he wanted to be good. He just couldn't fully control the darkness like most people can. The influence of nature also brings up ethical questions about Dexter's culpability. If his actions are heavily influenced by genetic factors, to what extent can he be held accountable? This aspect of his character challenges viewers to reconsider the nature of criminality and morality, blurring the lines between inherent traits and personal choice. Nurture's counterbalance. Harry's code as a moral compass. Harry Morgan, recognising Dexter's emerging violent tendencies, crafted what would become known as Harry's code. This code was an attempt to channel Dexter's dark passenger into a form of vigilante justice, focusing his actions on those who had escaped legal repercussions. Here's how this nurture aspect interacts with Dexter's nature. Harry's code served not only as a directive for Dexter's actions, but also as a form of moral education. It introduced concepts of morality, justice, and ethics into Dexter's life, concepts that might not have naturally developed given his sociopathic traits. This education was crucial in giving Dexter a semblance of conscience, albeit one tailored to his unique condition. For someone whose nature might have led to chaotic or indiscriminate violence, the code provided structure. It was a way to control the uncontrollable, turning Dexter's urges into a ritualistic, almost sacred act of killing. This control was essential for Dexter to function in society without being caught, but more importantly, it gave him a sense of purpose and identity beyond his trauma, so he believes he is actually doing good for the world. While Dexter's empathy is limited, Harry's influence attempted to cultivate some form of it, by teaching Dexter to target only those who deserve it. Harry inadvertently encouraged Dexter to consider the moral implications of his actions, even if his empathy was more about understanding societal norms than feeling them deeply. Over time, this event shapes Dexter's worldview, his relationships, and his identity. His detachment from emotional pain, his fascination with blood, and his methodical approach to killing, all these can be traced back to that shipping container. The trauma is both a cause and a constant companion in Dexter's life, influencing his decisions, his connections, and his internal moral compass. Harry not only taught Dexter how to kill, but also how to love and attach in a limited capacity. By being a loving father figure, Harry showed Dexter that there were people worth protecting, thus instilling a protective instinct toward his family, Deborah, which later extends to his wife, Rita, and his children. Through the code, Harry helped Dexter form an identity that wasn't solely defined by his trauma or his innate urges. Dexter became more than just a product of his nature, he became a forensic analyst by day, a vigilante by night, and a family man in between. This multifaceted identity was both a gift and a curse, offering stability but also constant internal conflict. However, the code wasn't without flaws. It couldn't account for every moral or ethical dilemma Dexter would face, leading to situations where Dexter had to navigate beyond or against the code. This necessity to adapt or interpret the code shows the ongoing struggle between his nature and the nurture Harry provided. Harry's influence didn't end with his death. It continued through Dexter's adherence to the code and his internal dialogues with Harry's memory. This ongoing nurture from beyond the grave highlights how deeply Harry's teachings were ingrained, offering Dexter a psychological anchor even in Harry's absence. Beyond Harry, other relationships like those with Deb, Rita, and later Hannah further shaped Dexter's nature. Each relationship challenged or reinforced aspects of his personality, teaching him new ways to express or suppress his dark side and showing that he is human, he just has a lot of issues. Defining sociopathy. Classically, sociopathy involves traits like lack of empathy, superficial charm, manipulativeness, and propensity for deceit. Dexter admits he doesn't feel emotions the way others do. His understanding of empathy is intellectual rather than emotional. However, he's not entirely without empathy, which is key to understanding his character. He can charm his way through social interactions, often using this skill to manipulate situations to his advantage, which is common among sociopaths. His entire life is built on a lie, from his job to his relationships, which showcases his adeptness at deceit. While Dexter lacks broad-spectrum empathy, He demonstrates selective empathy towards a very limited group of people, primarily his family. This selective empathy suggests he's capable of forming attachments, challenging the notion that he's entirely devoid of emotional depth. Much of Dexter's social interaction involves mimicking empathy. He's learned to read people, understand what they need to hear or see to maintain his cover, which is a testament to his social intelligence rather than true empathy. As you see in Dexter Original Sin, he doesn't really know how to fit in or be human, so to speak. He mimics a lot of other characters and will copy what they do so he can seem sort of normal. He often uses what he's learned from observing others to simulate emotions, which can sometimes blur the line between performance and genuine feeling, especially in moments of crisis involving those he cares about. Dexter excels in cognitive empathy, where he can understand perspectives, predict their actions, and manipulate outcomes. This cognitive aspect is what allows him to blend in and navigate social situations without arousing suspicion. Effective empathy. Here, he falls short. Effective empathy involves sharing and responding to the emotions of others, something Dexter struggles with unless it pertains to those few he's developed an attachment to. This is something Dirks called him out on multiple times during the first 2 seasons.
Well, we all got someplace to be. But you just found out that somebody who's supposed to be your friend is going to live. Does that make you feel anything? Anything at all?
Take your fucking hand off me.
Dexter's empathy is also learned through observation. His job as a blood spatter analyst gives him a unique perspective on human suffering, which might contribute to a deeper understanding of human emotion, even if he doesn't fully experience it himself. He does seem to care somewhat when innocent people are hurt, especially children. Over the series, there's a subtle evolution in Dexter's capacity for empathy, particularly with his children. His interactions with Harrison, Cody, and Asta show moments where he seems to genuinely care, suggesting that while his empathy might start as a learned behaviour, there's potential for growth, or at least the illusion thereof. Dexter's relationships, especially with Deb, provide a window into his ability to connect. These connections are fraught with complexity, but show that his sociopathy isn't absolute. There are cracks where human emotion can seep through. Dexter's character illustrates that sociopathy isn't black and white. It's a spectrum where individuals might exhibit a mix of traits, and empathy can manifest in unexpected ways or be learned in a manner that serves one's needs. In conclusion, Dexter Morgan challenges the conventional understanding of sociopathy by showing us a character who operates on both ends of the empathy spectrum. His journey is one of navigating through a world where his natural inclinations are at odds with the societal norms he must mimic, providing a rich exploration into the psyche of someone who's both a killer and someone striving for a semblance of humanity and normality, which he states a lot in the show that he does just want a normal life. Moral dilemmas and the struggle for ethics. Dexter's life is a constant negotiation between his dark impulses and the moral code he's been taught to follow. The struggle is at the heart of his character development and psychological journey. At its core, Harry's code was meant to imbue Dexter with a sense of morality, directing his killing towards those who deserve it. But this framework is far from perfect because there are limitations to the code. It doesn't account for every ethical scenario Dexter encounters. When he meets individuals who don't fit neatly into this framework, like Dirks, who, while antagonistic, isn't a killer, Dexter faces moral conflicts where the code fails or must be reinterpreted, hence why he almost turned himself into the police, as he didn't want to kill an innocent man, that of which he didn't have much choice with the whole Dirk situation. Over time, Dexter's interpretation of the code becomes more flexible. He starts making exceptions or bending the rules, which signals his struggle between adhering to the code and following his instincts or emotions. Dexter's relationships, especially with Rita and later Hannah, present some of his most profound moral dilemmas. His love for Rita and his children introduces a new moral dimension. He's driven to protect them, sometimes at the cost of his code, leading to scenarios where he must choose between his dark passenger and his family's safety, as we saw a lot of in season 4 when he was facing the Trinity Killer. Falling in love with someone like Hannah, who shares his dark side, challenges his moral boundaries. Does loving someone who kills make him hypocritical in adhering to Harry's code? This relationship forces Dexter to confront whether his moral code extends beyond his actions to his choice of partners. Keeping his true nature a secret adds another layer to his ethical struggle, as he bottles these emotions up and really wishes he could have someone to share them with, so he can feel a little more normal, relatable, and lift some of that weight off of his chest. Of course, this is quite difficult if you are a serial killer.
I'm a serial killer. Oh, God. Oh, that feels so amazing to say out loud.
Dexter's life of deceit, particularly towards those he loves, weighs on him, introducing a form of guilt or at least awareness of the harm his secrets could cause. He really wishes he could tell Rita and Deborah, but knows they would be disgusted if they knew the truth. This internal conflict is a moral struggle as he grapples with the ethics of his duplicity. There are moments where Dexter contemplates revealing his true self, indicating an internal desire for honesty, which clashes with the necessity of his secrecy for survival. Deciding who fits the criteria of his code isn't always clear-cut. This decision-making process forces Dexter to act as sort of a judge, jury, and executioner, roles that carry immense moral weight and act as sort of a god complex. Dexter occasionally acknowledges the broader impact of his actions, the families left behind, the lives changed, which adds another dimension to his moral calculus. There are hints that Dexter develops something akin to a conscience, not just following the code out of obligation, but out of genuine, albeit limited, moral consideration. His journey touches on themes of redemption. He questions whether he can save others while damning himself, or if he can ever be more than his dark passenger. A lot of Dexter's actions raise questions about vigilante justice. Is Dexter's killing truly about justice, or is it a form of vengeance, or even a means to satisfy his own needs? This question challenges the moral foundation of his code. By taking justice into his own hands, Dexter assumes a godlike role, brings its own set of ethical dilemmas about power, control, and the right to life, like in this scene.
No matter what you try, no matter when, no matter how hard you work, I'll always be a step ahead of you for one simple reason.
And what's that?
I own you.
That's quite an odd thing to say to someone. He knows Dux is closing in on his secret, and Dexter seems to see himself as some sort of god in this situation. In essence, Dexter's moral dilemmas are not just about choosing between good and evil, but navigating a complex moral landscape where the lines are blurred. His struggle for ethics is a testament to the tension between his nature and the nurture he received, making him a character who's both a villain and an anti-hero, perpetually at war with his own moral compass. The many faces of Dexter Morgan. Dexter's narrative is woven through an identity crisis that's as complex as his moral dilemma. He's a man of many masks, each battling for dominance with his psyche. He meticulously constructs an image of a well-adjusted forensic analyst, brother, and later husband and father. This performance requires constant vigilance and adaptation, leading to a perpetual identity crisis about his authenticity, and over time it wears you down a lot, even a guy who supposedly doesn't feel anything. Dexter sees himself as two beings, the man who lives by day and the killer who emerges by night, or the monster, which he describes himself as to Lila in season 2.
Is this the monster that you keep telling me about?
Trust me, when you meet the monster, you'll know.
This duality is a source of constant internal conflict as he struggles with the integration or separation of these identities. His dark passenger represents chaos, while his daily life is about control. The struggle to reconcile these aspects of his identity is a central theme of his psychological journey. This was really shown well in season 2, when they were catching on that the Bay Harbor Butcher was actually one of their own at Miami Metro. Dexter had to carefully choose who he was at every given moment and be on high alert way more than normal. His roles within his family further complicate his identity. His relationship with Deb is complex, filled with love, deceit, and protection. It challenges him to be more than just a killer, to be a brother who can support and love. He also has to maintain his act as she really looks up to him and adores him. Deb will be lost without Dexter, so he has to maintain his normalcy. Becoming a father to Harrison introduces a new facet of his identity. One that's protective and nurturing, contrasting sharply with his darker self. His fatherhood is both a source of redemption and a new battleground for his identity crisis, as he doesn't want his son to turn out like him. His relationships, particularly to Rita, force him to confront his ability to love and be loved, questioning whether he can truly embody the role of a husband while hiding his true nature. This probably being one of his biggest struggles in the show. He's well respected at work, which adds another layer to this crisis, the fear of losing the respect if his true self were revealed. There is a moment where Dexter seems to acknowledge that his dark passenger is an undeniable part of him, leading to a form of acceptance that he might not change but can control. The losses he experiences, particularly of Rita, force him to confront his identity more starkly, leading to moments of self-realization or at least clear understanding of his dual nature. Dexter's identity crisis is a narrative of self-discovery, conflict, and adaptation, encapsulating the struggle of a man trying to reconcile his monstrous nature with the human connections he forges. It's a profound exploration of what it means to know oneself amidst the chaos of one's own making. We've journeyed deep into the psyche of Dexter Morgan, examining the layers of his character through the lenses of nature versus nurture, sociopathy, moral dilemmas, and his profound identity crisis. Here's what we've learned. Dexter is a complex character. His psyche is a battleground where nature's violent tendencies clash with nurture's attempt at morality. This tension creates a rich narrative of internal conflict that's both tragic and compelling. The trauma from his childhood isn't just a backstory. It's the crucible that has forged his identity. It shows how deeply early experiences can shape one's life path, morality, and sense of self, offering a poignant look at the long-term effects of trauma. Dexter challenges our understanding of sociopathy by showing that even with such a diagnosis, there's room for love, attachment, and a semblance of empathy. His selective empathy and moral code suggest that sociopathy might not be as devoid of humanity as commonly thought. His moral dilemmas underscore the complexity of ethics when one's nature is at odds with societal norms. Dexter's adherence to Harry's code, while inherently flawed, raises questions about justice, morality, and the human capacity for change or redemption. Dexter's identity crisis is a mirror to the human condition. It reflects our own struggles with who we are versus who we must be for the world. His journey is an exploration of authenticity, performance, and the masks we all wear to some degree on a day-to-day basis. Above all, Dexter Morgan is a puzzle, a human puzzle. His story invites us to question not just the psychology of a killer, but the psychology of us all. He's a reminder that even in the darkest souls, there can be light, and within the light, there can be darkness. Thank you for watching this video. If you found this exploration intriguing, please like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments, and let me know which other characters you would like me to analyse.